Lucia's relief was hardly less than Stephen's. He would surely not have said anything so indiscreet if he had been contemplating an indiscretion. And she had no fear that his hurry to be off was due to any passionate desire to embrace her in the privacy of her car. She believed he understood, and her belief felt justified when he proposed that the car should be opened. Risholme, in the last 3 weeks of social progress, had not occupied the front row of Lucia's thoughts, but the second row, so to speak, had been entirely filled with it. For as far as the future dimly outlined itself behind the present, the plan was to go down there early in August and remain there with a few brilliant excursions till autumn peopled London again. She had hoped for a dash to Aix, where there would be many pleasant people, but Peppino had told her summarily that the Treasury would not stand it. Lucia had accepted that with the frankest good nature. She had made quite a gay little lament about it when she was asked what she was going to do in August. "Ah, all you lucky rich people with money to throw about. We've got to go and live quietly at home," she used to say. "But I shall love it, though I shall miss you all dreadfully. Risholme, dear Risholme, you know, adorable, and all the delicious funny friends down there who spoil me so dreadfully. I shall have lovely tranquil days, with a trot across the green to order fish, and a chat on the way, and my books, and my piano, and a chair in the garden, and an early bedtime instead of all these late hours. And I great life. But if you have a weekend to spare between your Aix and your yacht and your Scotland, how nice it would be if you just sent a postcard." Before they became anchorites, however, there was a long weekend for her and Peppino over the August bank holiday, and Lucia looked forward to that with unusual excitement. Adele was the hostess, and the scene that immense country house of hers in Essex. The whole world apparently was to be there, for Adele had said the house would be full, and it was to be a final reunion of the choicest spirits before the annual dispersion. Mrs. Garraby Ashton had longed to be bidden, but was not, and though Lucia was sorry for dear Millicent's disappointment, she could not but look down on it as a sort of perch far below her that showed how dizzily she had gone upwards. But she had no intentions of dropping good kind Milly, who was hopping about below. She must certainly come to the Hurst for a Sunday. That would be nice for her, and she would learn all about Adele's party. There were yet 10 days before that, and the morning after the triumphant affair at the Rutland Gallery, Lucia heard a faint rumor, coming from nowhere in particular, that Marcia Whitby was going to give a very small and very wonderful dance to wind up the season. She had not seen much of Marcia lately. In other words, she had seen nothing at all, and Lucia's last 3 invitations to her had been declined, 1 through a secretary and 2 through a telephone. Lucia continued, however, to talk about her with unabated familiarity and affection. The next day, the rumor became slightly more solid. Adele let slip some allusion to Marcia's ball, and hurriedly covered it up with talk of her own weekend. Lucia fixed her with a penetrating eye for a moment, but the eye failed apparently to penetrate. Adele went on gabbling about her own party, and took not the slightest notice of it. But in truth, Adele's gabble was a frenzied and feverish maneuver to get away from the subject of Marcia's ball. Marcia was no true Lucia-phile. Instead of feeling tranced pleasure in Lucia's successes and failures, her schemes and attainments and ambitions, she had lately been taking a high, severe line about her. "She's beyond a joke, Adele," she said. "I hear she's got a scrapbook, and puts in picture postcards and photographs of country houses, with dates below them to indicate she has been there." "No," said Adele. "How heavenly of her! I must see it. Or did you make it up?" "Indeed I didn't," said the injured Marcia. "And she's got in it a picture postcard of the moat garden at Whitby, with the date of the Sunday before last, when I had a party there and didn't ask her." Besides, she was in London at the time. And there's one of Buckingham Palace Garden, with the date of the last garden party. Was she asked? I haven't heard she was, said Adele. Then you may be sure she wasn't. She's beyond a joke, I tell you, and I'm not going to ask her to my dance. I won't. I will not. And she asked me to dine 3 times last week. It isn't fair. It's bullying. A weak-minded person would have submitted. But I'm not weak-minded, and I won't be bullied. I won't be forcibly fed, and I won't ask her to my dance. There. Don't be so unkind, said Adele. Besides, you'll meet her down at my house only a few days afterwards, and it will be awkward. Everybody else will have been. Well, then, she can pretend she has been exclusive, said Marcia snappily, and she'll like that. The rumors solidified into fact, and soon Lucia was forced to the dreadful conclusion that Marcia's ball was to take place without her. That was an intolerable thought, and she gave Marcia one more chance by ringing her up and inviting her to dinner on that night, so as to remind her she knew nothing about the ball. But Marcia's stony voice replied that, most unfortunately, she had a few people to dinner herself. Wherever she went, and where now did Lucia not go, she heard talk of the ball, and the plethora of princes and princesses that were to attend it. For a moment, the thought of princesses lightened the depression of this topic. Princess Isabel was rather seriously ill with influenza, so Lucia, driving down Park Lane, thought it would not be amiss to call and inquire how she was, for she had noticed that sometimes the paper recorded the names of inquirers. She did not any longer care in the least how Princess Isabel was. Whether she died or recovered was a matter of complete indifference to her in her present embittered frame of mind, for the princess had not taken the smallest notice of her all these weeks. However, there was the front door open, for there were other inquirers on the threshold, and Lucia joined them. She presented her card and asked in a trembling voice what news there was, and was told that the princess was no better. Lucia bowed her head in resignation, and then, after faltering a moment in her walk, pulled herself together, and with a firmer step went back to her motor. After this interlude, her mind returned to the terrible topic. She was due at the drawing-room meeting at Sophie Allingsby's house to hear a lecture on psychoanalysis, and she really hardly felt up to it. But there would certainly be a quantity of interesting people there, and the lecture itself might possibly be of interest, and so before long she found herself in the black dining-room, which had been cleared for the purpose. With the self-effacing instincts of the English, the audience had left the front-row chairs completely unoccupied, and she got a very good place. The lecture had just begun, and so her entry was not unmarked. Stephen was there, and as she seated herself, she nodded to him and patted the empty chair by her side with a beckoning gesture. Her lover, therefore, sidled up to her and took it. Lucia whistled her thoughts away from such ephemeral and frivolous subjects as dances, and tried to give Professor Bonstetter her attention. She felt that she had been living a very hectic life lately. The world and its empty vanities had been too much with her, and she needed some intellectual tonic. She had seen no pictures lately, except Bobby, or was it Bertie? Alton's. She had heard no music. She had not touched the piano herself for weeks. She had read no books, and at the most had skimmed the reviews of such as had lately appeared, and be able to reproduce a short but striking criticism or two if the talk became literary. She must not let the mere froth of living entirely conceal by its winking headliness of foam the true beverage below it. There was Sophie, with her hair over her eyes and her chin in her hand, dressed in a faded rainbow, weird beyond description, but rapt in concentration, while she herself was letting the notion of a dance to which she had not been asked and was clearly not to be asked, drive like a mist between her and these cosmic facts about dreams and the unconscious self. How curious that if you dreamed about boiled rabbit, it meant that sometime in early childhood you had been kissed by a poacher in a railway carriage and had forgotten all about it. What a magnificent subject for excited research psychoanalysis would have been in those keen intellectual days at Risholm. She thought of them now with a vague yearning for their simplicity and absorbing earnestness, of the hours she had spent with Georgie over piano duets, of Daisy Quantock's Ouija board and planchette, of the museum with its mittens. Risholm presented itself now as an abode of sweet peace, where there were no disappointments or heart-burnings, for sooner or later she had always managed to assert her will and constitute herself priestess of the current interests. Suddenly, the solution of her present difficulty flashed upon her. Risholm. She would go to Risholm. That would explain her absence from Marcia's stupid ball. The lecture came to an end, and with others she buzzed for a little while round Professor Bonstetter and had a few words with her hostess. Too interesting, marvelous, was it not, dear Sophie? Boiled rabbit, how curious. And the outcropping of the unconscious in dreams explains so much about phobias, people who can't go in the tube. So pleased to have heard it. Ah, there's Aggie. Aggie, darling, what a treat, wasn't it? Such a refreshment from our bustlings and runnings about to get back into origins. I've got to fly, but I couldn't miss this. Dreadful overlapping all this afternoon, and poor Princess Isabel is no better. I just called on my way here, but I wasn't allowed to see her. Stephen, where is Stephen? See if my motor is there, dear. Au revoir, dear Sophie. We must meet again very soon. Are you going to Adele's next week? No? How tiresome. Wonderful lecture. Calming. Lucia edged herself out of the room with these very hurried greetings, for she was really eager to get home. She found Peppino there, having tea peacefully, all by himself, and sank exhausted in a chair. Give me a cup of tea. Strong tea, Peppino, she said. I've been racketing about all day, and I feel done for. How I shall get through these next 2 or 3 days I really don't know, and London is stifling. You look worn out too, my dear. Peppino acknowledged the truth of this. He had hardly had time even to go to his club this last day or two, and had been reflecting on the enormous strength of the weaker sex. But for Lucia to confess herself done for was a portentous thing. He could not remember such a thing happening before. Well, there are not many more days of it, he said. 3 more this week, and then Lady Brixton's party. He gave several loud sneezes. Not a cold? Asked Lucia. Something extraordinarily like one, said he. Lucia became suddenly alert again. She was sorry for Peppino's cold, but it gave her an admirable gambit for what she had made up her mind to do. My dear, that's enough, she said. I won't have you flying about London with a bad cold coming on. I shall take you down to Risholm tomorrow. Oh, but you can't, my dear, said he. You've got your engagement book full for the next 3 days. Oh, a lot of stupid things, said she. And really, I tell you quite honestly, I'm fairly worn out. It'll do us both good to have a rest for a day or 2. Now, don't make objections. Let us see what I've got to do. The days were pretty full, though, alas, Thursday evening was deplorably empty, and Lucia had a brisk half-hour at the telephone. To those who had been bidden here, and to those to whom she had been bidden, she gave the same excuse, namely, that she had been advised, by herself, 2 or 3 days' complete rest. She rang up the Hurst to say that they were coming down tomorrow and would bring the necessary attendance, and rang up Georgie, for she was not going to fall into that error again, and in a mixture of baby language and Italian, which he found very hard to understand, asked him to dine tomorrow night. And finally she scribbled a short paragraph to the leading morning papers to say that Mrs. Philip Lucas had been ordered to leave London for 2 or 3 days' complete rest. She had hesitated a moment over the wording of that, for it was Peppino who was much more in need of rest than she, but it would have been rather ludicrous to say that Mr. and Mrs. Philip Lucas were in need of a complete rest. These announcements she sent by hand, so that there might be no miscarriage in their appearance tomorrow morning. And then, as an afterthought, she rang up Daisy Quantock and asked her and Robert to lunch tomorrow. She felt much happier. She would not be at the Fell Marshes ball, because she was resting in the country.